There's a quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes outside of Denver. Nice houses. Nothing flashy, but the kind of street where you can tell the mortgages are paid off. And if you walk down that block on a Saturday morning, you would not see a single exotic car in any of those driveways. What you'd see is a 9-year-old Camry, a pickup truck with a dented tailgate, a minivan with a parking permit sticker from 3 jobs ago. The guy who owns the corner house is worth $4 million. He introduces himself as being in operations. We were trained to read wealth through visible signals: the car, the watch, the restaurant order, the neighborhood upgrade. That system worked when money actually announced itself. Something shifted. The people quietly building real net worth stopped looking the part, and we never updated the map. So if the signals no longer match the reality, how do you actually recognize it? There are 6 specific behavioral patterns that durable wealth leaves behind, not personality quirks. Each one has a financial mechanism underneath it, a reason it works, a reason it compounds. That's what this video is about, because if you're still using appearance as a proxy for financial health, you are comparing yourself to the wrong people and adjusting your behavior accordingly. My name is Alex, and if you've ever walked away from a conversation wondering how someone that ordinary looking ended up that far ahead, stay with this. I'm going to show you the 6 behavioral fingerprints of quiet wealth and the specific logic behind each one. Once you understand what these patterns actually are, you stop measuring yourself against people who are performing wealth, and you start recognizing the decisions that are actually moving the number. The first pattern shows up within 30 seconds of meeting someone, and it has nothing to do with what they say. It's what they don't. Sign 1. They never tell you much. Here's something worth paying attention to. The wealthiest person in any room is usually the quietest one about it. Not quiet in a shy way, quiet in a very specific, deliberate way. And once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. Think about the last time someone told you, unprompted, what they earned, or dropped a number into conversation: their bonus, their portfolio, what their house is worth now. There is a pattern there. The people most eager to share that information are rarely the ones whose financial picture you would actually want. That is not a coincidence, it is a signal. The secretly wealthy talk about money differently. Ask them how they are doing financially, and you will hear something like, "Can't complain," or "We're comfortable," or the classic, "Doing all right." Vague, calm, completely uninformative, and entirely on purpose. Here is how this plays out in practice. There is a guy, early 50s, lives in a mid-sized city in the Midwest, runs a small electrical contracting business he started in his late 20s. His name is Gary. To look at him, you would guess he does fine. Decent house? Nothing remarkable. Drives a 6-year-old Ford F-150 with some miles on it. When new neighbors move in, he introduces himself as a contractor. Technically accurate. Not the whole picture. Gary's net worth is somewhere north of $2.8 million, and the only people who know that are his accountant and his wife. Gary does not hide this out of shame. He hides it because he has watched what happens when the number gets out. Service providers reprice. Old acquaintances reappear. Family members start framing requests differently. One number changes every relationship it touches, and not always in a direction you want. So Gary stays vague, not dishonest, just incomplete. Now you're probably thinking, isn't that a little paranoid? And maybe it is, at the margins, but follow the incentives for a second. The moment your financial position becomes visible, other people's behavior toward you adjusts. Sometimes subtly, sometimes not. Contractors quote hire. Friends assume you're covering dinner. Relatives mention things they're going through. None of this is malicious. It is just human nature responding to new information. The quietly wealthy have simply decided not to hand out that information. There is something else happening here too. People who have genuinely built something tend to have less need to perform it. The performance of wealth, the flex, the casually dropped number, the upgrade that happens to come up in conversation. That is usually doing a job. It is filling a gap between how someone wants to be seen and how they actually feel about where they are. When the gap closes, the performance gets quieter. Not always, but often enough to be a pattern. This is one of the more useful filters you can apply when you're trying to learn from people around you, the ones talking the loudest about their returns, their deals, their income. Treat that as entertainment, not education. The ones who deflect, who understate, who genuinely seem unbothered by the question. Those are the people worth watching more carefully. Not because silence equals wealth, but because people who have done the work tend to be more interested in the work than in the audience. The language is just the surface layer, though. The more revealing sign is sitting right outside in the driveway, and the math behind it is more uncomfortable than most people expect. Sign 2, they drive boring. Nobody teaches you this in school, but the driveway is one of the most honest financial documents a person owns. Pull up to almost any house in a neighborhood that looks wealthy, and you will find one of two things: either a brand new vehicle with a payment attached to it, or something older, reliable, and completely paid off. The secretly wealthy almost always fall into the second category, not because they cannot afford new, because they ran the numbers and decided they would rather not. Here is what the numbers actually say. A new car loses roughly 20% of its value in the first year alone, not over 5 years, not gradually, the first 12 months. By year 5, it has shed approximately 60% of what the original buyer paid. That is not wear and tear. That is a transfer from the person who bought it new to the person who buys it used. Somebody absorbs that loss every single time. The secretly wealthy have simply decided it will not be them. So where do they buy? Usually around the 3 to 4 year mark. That is the sweet spot. The steepest part of the depreciation curve is already behind the vehicle. The reliability window is still comfortably ahead. The first owner did all the expensive absorbing, and now the car is available at a fraction of what it cost brand new, often still under extended warranty, with plenty of life left in it. Let me give you a concrete example. Take David, a project manager in his mid-40s living outside of Nashville. His colleagues at work drive new SUVs with payments in the $700 and $800 range, which is right around the national average for a new vehicle purchase currently. David drives a 4-year-old Honda Pilot he bought used. His payment when he financed it was around $400 a month. He paid it off early. Now he drives it free and clear. The difference between David's situation and his colleagues is roughly $360 a month. That does not sound life-changing. Run the math, and it is. $360 a month invested in a broad index fund. The S&P 500 has returned approximately 10% annually over the last 100 years. Over 20 years, compounds to approximately $247,000. David contributed $86,400 of his own money over that period. The remaining $160,000 came from compounding alone, from time, not from income. The new car did not cost his colleagues $44,000. It cost them $247,000. They just could not see it because the transaction was disguised as a monthly payment. Now, to be fair, nobody is suggesting you drive something unreliable to prove a point. That is not the move. A 200,000-mile gamble that leaves you stranded is not a wealth strategy. The point is the 3-year-old Toyota, Honda, or truck that the first owner has already absorbed the depreciation on. That vehicle is not a compromise. It is the smarter financial decision to wear used cars' clothes. There is one more layer here worth naming. The dealership does not benefit from you understanding any of this. Neither does the manufacturer. The entire financing structure is built around making the monthly payment feel manageable, while the total cost of ownership stays invisible. The quietly wealthy just refuse to look away from the total number. And once you see how they handle the car, the next pattern starts to make a lot more sense, because it shows up in something as small as a $20 purchase. Sign 3. They sweat the small stuff. This next one looks like a contradiction. Once you see the logic underneath it, it makes complete sense. Here's the pattern. The secretly wealthy will spend 30 minutes researching a $40 purchase, reading reviews, opening tabs, watching a comparison video, closing the tab, coming back to it the next day, and then, without blinking, write a $15,000 check for a roof repair the same week. No hesitation, no second opinion. Done. From the outside, that looks like someone whose financial judgment is completely inconsistent. It is not. It is one of the most disciplined financial systems a person can operate, and most people running it could not even explain why it works. Start with the small purchase. The reason the secretly wealthy slow down on a $40 item is not because $40 is significant. It is because $40 is invisible. Small purchases bypass every mental filter you have. The number feels trivial, the friction is zero, and the decision is made in seconds, usually in response to an ad, a notification, or a moment of mild boredom. That is exactly when judgment is at its worst. So they insert friction deliberately. They force the purchase to survive a waiting period, anywhere from 7 to 30 days, depending on the item, before it gets approved. What happens during that window is the important part. The feeling that made the thing seem necessary fades. Life continues. The problem the product was going to solve either solves itself or turns out not to have been a real problem. By the time 30 days pass, the vast majority of those purchases simply disappear. Not because of discipline, but because the impulse ran out of fuel. Only the genuinely useful purchases survive the wait. Now think about what this does to monthly spending over a year. Even eliminating 2 or 3 impulse purchases a month, at an average of $50 to $80 each, saves somewhere between $1,200 and nearly $2,000 annually. That is before compounding. That is just the raw cash that stays in the account instead of funding someone else's revenue target. The roof is a completely different category. When the secretly wealthy write a large check quickly, it is not because they are being careless. It is because that decision was already made, mentally pre-approved, sitting in a category they think of as foundational maintenance. The roof is not a surprise. It is a known variable they planned for. When it arrives, there is nothing to deliberate. The money exists, the need is real, and waiting only makes it more expensive. So they move. This is the part worth sitting with for a moment. Most people do it exactly backwards. They barely think about small purchases and agonize over large, necessary ones. The secretly wealthy agonize over the small ones, because that is where the death by 1,000 cuts actually happens. And they move fast on the large ones because those were never really the question. There is one more thing underneath this pattern that does not get mentioned enough. Most retail sales are discounts off prices that were inflated specifically to accommodate the discount. The urgency is constructed. The scarcity is often fictional. Flash sales, countdown timers, only 3 left. These are psychological tools designed to collapse your decision window before the impulse fades. The secretly wealthy treat every artificial deadline as a signal to wait longer, not move faster. They have simply noticed who benefits from their hurry. What is interesting is that this same logic, designing the decision before the moment arrives, shows up even more clearly in how they handle their actual cash flow. Sign 4. Their money moves itself. Most people think building wealth is about making the right decisions. The secretly wealthy figured out that it is actually about making fewer decisions. That sounds like a small distinction. It is not. Here's the problem with relying on decisions. Every decision you make draws from the same limited pool of mental energy. By the time Thursday evening rolls around after a full week of work, of managing people, of dealing with whatever the day threw at you, you are not making your best financial calls. You are making your most convenient ones. And convenient usually means spending, not saving. Convenient means the path of least resistance, which is rarely the path that compounds. The secretly wealthy solved this problem a long time ago, not with more willpower. With architecture, here is how it works. The moment a paycheck lands, money starts moving automatically, before they see it, before they spend it, before they talk themselves into waiting until next month to invest. A fixed percentage goes straight into investments, not whatever is left over at the end of the month, first, before anything else. From there, a second transfer covers fixed bills on autopay. A third tops off the emergency reserve. A fourth loads a set weekly spending budget. Whatever remains after that is genuinely free to spend, without guilt, without tracking, without a second thought. The whole thing runs in the background like software. They wrote the rule once. Now they do not revisit it every month. Let me give you a concrete example of why this matters. Take Christine, a mid-level marketing director in her late 40s, earning around $94,000 a year. For most of her 30s, she intended to invest consistently, and she did, in good months. In harder months, something always came up. The car needed work, a trip she had been putting off, a month that just felt expensive for no single identifiable reason. At the end of a decade, her investment account reflected good intentions with poor execution. At 41, she set up an automatic transfer. 12% of every paycheck moved the morning it landed before she touched anything else. Her lifestyle did not change noticeably. The number was calibrated to what she was already loosely saving in good months. The difference was that now it happened in bad months too, in distracted months. in months when she was too busy to even check her accounts. The system did not care what kind of month it was. It ran anyway. That consistency, compounded over 15 years, at a 10% average annual return, is worth more than almost any individual investment decision she could have made during the same period. The account did not grow because she was brilliant. It grew because it was never given the chance not to grow. This is the thing most financial conversations miss entirely. The gap between people who accumulate and people who intend to accumulate is rarely income. It is rarely knowledge. It is almost always the moment at the end of the month when the decision gets made again from scratch and something more immediate wins. Automation removes that moment. The decision was already made. It already ran. There is nothing left to negotiate. Now, you're probably thinking this is just basic budgeting advice. And on the surface, it sounds that way. But the secretly wealthy are not automating their savings because a finance article told them to. They are doing it because they have a specific and unusual relationship with their time. And that turns out to be the next sign entirely. Sign 5. They buy time, not things. At some point, the secretly wealthy made a decision that most people around them never quite arrived at. They stopped treating their hours as free. That shift sounds simple. The financial implications of it are anything but. Here is what most people do without realizing it. They guard their money carefully. They track the grocery bill. They skip the upgrade. They wait for a sale. And then they give their time away without a second thought. 4 hours on a Saturday running errands that could have been handled with a delivery fee. 2 hours on a Sunday doing a task they could have paid someone $60 to handle. The money stays in the account. The hours disappear. And somewhere in the background, the math on that trade is quietly terrible. The secretly wealthy notice this. At some point, and for most of them, it was not a dramatic realization, just a gradual recalibration. They started treating time as the scarcer resource, not money, time. And once that switch flipped, their spending patterns started to look strange to everyone around them. They pay for grocery delivery without apologizing for it. They have a cleaning service come twice a month. They take the car service to the airport at 5 in the morning instead of asking a friend or waking up at 3 to find parking. From the outside, this reads as laziness, or as the kind of indulgence that only makes sense if you have money to burn. It is neither. It is capital allocation with a clear return. Take someone like Brian, early 50s, independent financial consultant, billing his clients at around $95 an hour for his expertise. On a given Saturday, Brian could spend 3 hours doing yard work, handling household errands, and waiting in line at the post office. Or you could pay a total of $70 for a lawn service and a delivery app, and spend those 3 hours doing a piece of consulting work, going for a run, or being present with his family in a way that actually restores him for the week ahead. The math on that Saturday is not even close. Brian is not spending $70. He is recovering roughly $285 worth of his own productive time. The person who calls that extravagant is doing the accounting wrong. Now, here is the version of this that applies even if you are not billing by the hour. Your time has value even when it is not being sold. An hour of genuine rest, of focused exercise, of uninterrupted presence with someone you care about. These are not luxuries, they are inputs. They affect your health, your decision-making, your relationships, and ultimately your capacity to earn and think clearly over the long run. The secretly wealthy understand this intuitively. They do not outsource tasks to be lazy. They outsource tasks to protect the hours that actually matter. There is also something worth saying about permission here. A lot of people in their 40s and 50s intellectually understand this trade-off but still feel vaguely guilty acting on it. Like spending money to save time is somehow cheating. It is not. The guilt usually traces back to a mental model that was built in a different financial chapter, one where money was genuinely tight and time felt abundant. That model made sense then. It does not automatically update itself when the circumstances change. The secretly wealthy updated it. And the way they think about their time connects directly to how they read the broader economy around them, which turns out to be the most underrated sign of all. Sign 6. They read the economy differently. Most people experience the economy. The secretly wealthy read it. And that difference in posture, passive versus analytical, turns out to matter enormously for where they end up. Here is what reading it actually looks like in practice. A few years ago, something started showing up in earnings calls, in retail data, and in airline revenue reports that economists eventually gave a name to. the K-shaped economy. The idea is straightforward. Instead of everyone moving through the same economic environment at roughly the same pace, the path splits. One group kept compounding, assets appreciating, portfolios growing, purchasing power holding steady or expanding. Another group ran into a wall, inflation eating into fixed incomes, savings depleted by rising costs. The gap between what things cost and what paychecks could cover quietly widening every quarter. The data behind this is not subtle. The top 10% of earners in the US currently account for just over 49% of all consumer spending. 5 years ago, that number was 43%. The top 10% of households by net worth hold 67% of total household wealth in this country, averaging $8.1 million each. The bottom 50% of households hold 2.5% of total wealth, averaging around $60,000. These are not estimates, they are Federal Reserve figures from the most recent reporting period. You can feel this split in daily life, even if you have never seen those numbers. Prices across the board are up roughly 25% since 2020. The median home price hit $432,000 in the middle of last year, up 55% in 5 years. For people who already owned assets going into that period, the last 5 years were genuinely good. Stocks climbed, home equity expanded, net worth moved in the right direction. For people who did not own assets, the same 5 years compressed their financial position. The economy did not treat everyone the same. It ran 2 different experiments simultaneously. The secretly wealthy were not surprised by any of this. They had been watching the early signals for years before it had a name. Here's how it showed up in the businesses around them. Airlines began reporting that first class and premium cabin revenue was not just holding, it was driving the majority of their profit, while standard coach seats sat partially empty. Walmart leadership stated publicly that upper and middle income households were now the engine of their growth, meaning people who used to shop at full-price grocery stores were trading down to Walmart, while the lower end had pulled back further still. These are not isolated anecdotes. They are the K-shape made visible in consumer behavior quarter after quarter. The quietly wealthy looked at those patterns and asked a simple question. Where is the compounding actually happening? Not where is the narrative, not where is the excitement. Where is the compounding? And then they positioned accordingly. Broad index funds over individual stock picks, owned assets over rented ones, income streams that did not depend entirely on their own labor. Not because they had a crystal ball, because they read the document carefully and acted on what it said. This is the part that is easy to miss. The quietly wealthy did not benefit from the K-shaped economy because they were lucky or already rich. Many of them started from the same place as everyone else. They benefited because they identified the direction things were moving, made decisions aligned with that direction early, and then stayed consistent while the split widened around them. They were not smarter. They were just paying attention to a different set of signals. And that is the thread that runs through every single sign in this video, the hidden metric. Here's the realization that ties all 6 signs together. The secretly wealthy are not doing extraordinary things. They are doing ordinary things, quietly, consistently, and completely indifferent to whether anyone notices. They understate because visibility is a cost. They drive used cars because depreciation is a transfer. And they refuse to be on the wrong end of it. They slow down on small purchases because that is where the invisible bleeding happens. They automate their money because willpower loses to a hard month, but architecture does not. They buy back their time because they did the math on what their hours are actually worth. And they read the economy like a document, positioning early, adjusting quietly, without waiting for the consensus to catch up. The common thread is not discipline. It is a measurement. They are tracking a different number than most people around them. So the question worth sitting with is this. What are you currently measuring? Because if the metric is appearance, the car, the watch, the visible upgrade, you will keep optimizing for the wrong output. The scoreboard the secretly wealthy are watching does not have an audience. It just compounds. There is a natural follow-on question that this video does not fully answer. Why do most people, even people who understand everything covered here, still default to the opposite behavior? That is not a character flaw. It is a design problem. And understanding the mechanism behind it changes everything about how you approach the next decision. If this reframes something you are currently thinking through, the subscribe button means you will be here for that conversation. And if someone in your life needs to hear this framing, send it to them. Most people are playing a game they did not consciously choose. Sometimes one video is enough to make them look up and notice.